Hey everyone, welcome back to English Medium, your calm little corner of the internet where we can practice English, slow down our thoughts, and talk about real life without pretending everything is always fine. Today's episode is about emotions, reactions, and the tiny pause that can change your whole day.
Yeah, and if you're listening on a bus, in a kitchen, in a classroom, or secretly checking this instead of doing what you plan to do, we're glad you're here. No judgment from us. We just want to make this feel like a conversation you can relax into while still learning something useful.
I think a lot of people hear the word emotion and imagine something dramatic like tears, shouting, or huge life decisions. But honestly, most emotional moments are quiet. They happen in a message, a glance, a weird feeling in your chest, or that little thought that says, "Oh no, something is wrong."
Exactly. And the strange part is how fast the mind fills in the blanks. One short reply from someone, one delay, one change in tone, and suddenly your brain writes a whole movie. It's rarely a calm documentary. It's usually a suspense series with way too many unnecessary plot twists.
That is so true. Someone says, "Okay," and your mind starts acting like a detective, a judge, and a fortune teller at the same time. Maybe they're upset. Maybe I said the wrong thing. Maybe this is a disaster. And then you're reacting to the story, not the actual facts in front of you.
Right, and that story can feel completely real in the moment. That's why emotional control is not about being cold or pretending nothing affects you. It's about noticing that inner story before it becomes your whole reality. It's about catching the narrator before the narrator takes over everything.
We should say this clearly for listeners learning English, too. Your brain is not always your best translator. It translates uncertainty into fear, silence into rejection, and delay into danger. Sometimes the brain is helpful, but sometimes it's just creative in the worst possible way.
And when people hear that, they often feel relieved because they realize they are not crazy. They're human. Humans make meaning fast. We connect dots fast. The problem is that sometimes we connect the wrong dots and then run with the conclusion like it was confirmed by evidence.
So let's pause on the important question. What happens in the moment between feeling something and acting on it? That tiny space is where your choices live. It might feel small, but that space is huge. It is where patience enters, where awareness enters, and where a different outcome becomes possible.
Yeah, and most people don't train that space. They train their opinions, their schedules, their habits, but not that gap. Yet that's the place where you can say, wait, let me breathe, let me think. Let me not send the text, not say the sharp thing, not assume the worst immediately.
Sometimes just naming the feeling helps. You can say to yourself, "I'm frustrated," or "I'm embarrassed," or "I'm anxious." That simple sentence creates distance. Instead of being inside the storm, you start observing it. And once you can observe it, you're less likely to be dragged around by it.
That's a powerful shift, because if you can observe a feeling, then the feeling is no longer the boss. It's still there, sure, but it's not driving the car. You are not denying the emotion. You are just refusing to hand it the steering wheel every single time it shows up.
And that sounds simple, but it is hard in real life. When your heart is beating fast or your face feels hot, it is easy to believe that the feeling must be obeyed immediately. But feelings are real without being perfect. They can warn you, but they can also exaggerate what is happening.
That's why waiting matters so much. Not forever, not in a dramatic way, just a few seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Enough time to let the first wave pass so you can see what is actually left. A lot of mistakes are not made from deep wisdom. They are made from speed.
I love that idea because it feels doable. If someone tells me to become emotionally perfect, I will probably give up in 5 seconds. But if someone says, pause for a few breaths before reacting, then I can work with that. Small tools are often the most realistic tools.
And the funny part is that a tiny pause can look boring from the outside, but inside it is a big victory. You're interrupting the usual pattern. Instead of instant reaction, you create choice. Instead of being automatic, you become intentional. That is a real skill, not a small one.
Let's use a simple example. Imagine you send a message and the other person does not reply. Your mind might say, they hate me, they're angry, I did something wrong. But there are many other possibilities. They could be busy, distracted, tired, driving, or simply not looking at the
Exactly. Emotional control often means refusing the first dramatic explanation. Not because you are trying to be naive, but because you know the first explanation is not always the truth. It's just the first explanation. And first explanations, like first drafts, are often messy and incomplete.
This is where self-awareness becomes practical. You begin to notice your own patterns. Maybe you always panic when someone is quiet. Maybe you always think silence means rejection. Once you notice the pattern, you can start questioning it instead of obeying it. That is where change begins.
Yeah, and that question can be really simple. Is this fact or is this fear? That one question can save a lot of stress. It doesn't solve everything, but it creates a pause between the feeling and the conclusion. Sometimes that pause is enough to stop a whole spiral before it starts.
And spirals are exhausting. One worry leads to another, and suddenly your mind is running in circles while your body is still sitting in the same chair. You're tired, but nothing around you has actually changed. The battle is happening inside your interpretation of the situation.
That's a great way to say it. The situation and the interpretation are not the same thing. The situation may be small, but the interpretation may be huge. Emotional maturity means learning to separate those two things. It means saying, okay, something happened, but what story am I telling myself about it?
For English learners, this is also useful vocabulary. A reaction is fast and often emotional. A response is more thoughtful and controlled. Reaction is the first spark. Response is the choice that follows. That difference is tiny in letters, but huge in meaning and behavior.
I like that distinction because it gives people a word for the thing they are trying to do. Many listeners may already feel the difference in their lives, but now they can name it. And when you can name something, you can notice it faster. Language doesn't just describe life, it can also organize it.
Exactly. And I want to be careful here. Emotional control does not mean never crying, never getting upset, never feeling disappointed. That would be impossible and honestly a little strange. The goal is not emotional emptiness. The goal is emotional stability, even when emotions are strong.
That's an important point. Some people think control means suppression, like putting feelings in a locked box and never opening it. But that usually backfires. Feelings need attention, not denial. The healthier skill is to feel fully without becoming fully controlled by the feeling.
I think of it like weather. You can't stop the rain by yelling at the sky. But you can carry an umbrella. You can choose where to stand. You can choose how to move through the day. The rain is real, but it doesn't have to define your entire route.
That's a beautiful image, and it connects to the idea of resilience. Resilience is not being untouched by storms. It's being able to continue through them. It's knowing you can bend without breaking every time something uncomfortable shows up in your life.
We also need to talk about how emotions affect decisions. Fear can make us avoid things that might help us grow. Doubt can make us stop before we even start. And shame can make us hide when we actually need support. Emotions are useful signals, but they are not always good decision makers.
Exactly. If fear could talk, it would often say, stay safe, stay small, don't risk anything. Sometimes that is wise, but other times it keeps you trapped. Emotional wisdom means learning when to listen and when to question. Not every loud feeling deserves full authority.
That is such a good point. A loud feeling can still be a mistaken feeling. It can be urgent without being accurate. So when you feel the pressure rise, you can ask, what is this emotion protecting me from? Is the danger real, or is my mind being a little theatrical again?
And most minds are theatrical from time to time. That's why humor helps. When you laugh at the absurdity of your own dramatic assumptions, you loosen their grip. You don't become careless, you just become less trapped. Sometimes a little self-distance is the fastest route to calm.
This is why I love conversations like this. They remind us that emotional control is not a personality type. It is a practice. Nobody wakes up fully calm and wise every day. Everyone has moments when they overreact, misunderstand, or assume the worst. The difference is what they do next.
Yeah, and that next step matters more than people think. You can have a bad emotional moment and still recover well. You can feel hurt and still respond kindly. You can feel disappointed and still stay focused. The goal is not to never wobble. The goal is to recover faster and more skillfully.
Let's make this very practical. When you feel triggered, try 3 steps. First, pause. Second, breathe. Third, ask what else could be true. That third question opens space. It reminds you that your first interpretation is not the only possible interpretation, even if it feels convincing.
And if you want to go one step further, ask what you actually need. Do you need rest? Do you need clarity? Do you need to step away from the phone for a minute? A lot of emotional chaos becomes easier when you stop asking, why am I like this? And start asking, what do I need right now?
That shift from self-criticism to self-care is powerful. People often blame themselves for having feelings, as if emotion were a failure. But emotion is information. It tells you something about your experience, your values, your needs, or your fears. The task is to listen without panicking.
Yes, listen without panicking. That should be a shirt, because panic makes things louder, faster, and harder to understand. Calm makes space for meaning. And when you understand the meaning of a feeling, you are much better equipped to choose what comes next instead of just reacting by habit.
Another helpful idea is to separate the moment from the meaning. For example, a delayed reply is a moment. They don't care about me is a meaning. The moment may be true. The meaning may not be. Learning to separate the two can save you from a lot of unnecessary suffering.
That's a very mature skill, and it applies everywhere, not only in relationships. It applies in school, at work, with family, and even with yourself. If you make one mistake, the moment is simple. A mistake happened. The meaning can become extreme. I always fail, I'm hopeless, I can't do anything right.
And those extreme meanings are usually not helpful. They turn one event into a global identity. That's why language matters so much. When you say, I made a mistake, that's specific. When you say, I am a mistake, that's destructive. The words we use can either guide us or punish us.
That is such an important difference. Specific language is kinder and more accurate. It leaves room for growth. It says, okay, something went wrong, but that does not define the whole person. This is one reason we love English learning episodes like this. Language can change how you think about yourself.
Exactly. A good sentence can make a hard feeling easier to handle. For example, instead of saying, everything is falling apart, you might say, I'm having a difficult moment. That sounds smaller, but it is also truer. And when something is truer, it is usually easier to face.
And sometimes the truth is simply, I don't know yet. That's a very underrated sentence. People hate uncertainty, so they rush toward a conclusion. But saying, I don't know yet, can be a form of emotional strength. It keeps you from locking yourself into a story before the facts are clear.
I want to bring in the house image again because it's so useful. If one room in the house is messy, you do not need to destroy the whole house. You can clean one room, you can close a door, you can focus on the next step instead of turning one problem into a full disaster.
Yeah, and that's a great reminder for days when everything feels off. Maybe work was difficult, but that doesn't mean the whole day is ruined. Maybe one conversation was awkward, but that doesn't mean every relationship is damaged. We often give one bad room too much power over the whole house.
Sometimes, honestly, we give one bad thought too much power over the whole mind. One worry arrives, and suddenly it gets a microphone, a spotlight, and a full audience. A healthier approach is to say, thank you for sharing, but you are not the only voice in this room.
That's a fantastic line, and it captures a deeper truth. Your thoughts are events, not rulers. They come and go. You can notice them, question them, and decide whether they deserve your energy. If every thought became a command, life would be chaos every hour of the day.
Let's pause and talk about consistency, because that word matters. Emotional control improves through practice, not pressure. You don't become calm by demanding perfection from yourself. You become calmer by repeating small, healthy actions enough times that they start feeling natural.
Exactly. Consistency is boring in the best possible way. It's not glamorous, it doesn't always feel exciting, but it works. When you repeatedly pause before reacting, repeatedly breathe before answering, repeatedly check the facts, your nervous system starts learning a new habit.
And habits are powerful because they work even when motivation is low. That's why so many people struggle with change. They wait for the perfect feeling first, but emotions are unreliable drivers. Sometimes you have to move before you feel ready, and then the feeling follows.
Right. And that's a huge lesson in adult life, too. You do not wait to be perfectly confident before making a healthy choice. You make the choice while anxious, uncertain, or tired. The action can come first. The confidence often grows later, after you've already started.
That is such a useful idea for language learners, too. You do not need perfect English before speaking. You speak, make mistakes, adjust, and keep going. The same emotional principle applies. You do not need perfect calm before responding well. You can begin with a small pause and build from there.
And that removes a lot of pressure. People often think self-improvement must be dramatic, like a total life makeover. But real growth is usually subtle. It looks like one less impulsive message, one deeper breath, one kinder sentence to yourself, one better choice in a stressful moment.
I also think emotional maturity involves less obsession with being understood by everyone. Sometimes people misunderstand you. Sometimes they project their own mood onto you. Sometimes they respond badly for reasons that have nothing to do with your worth. You do not need to chase every misunderstanding.
That's a lesson that saves a lot of energy. You don't have to attend every argument. You don't have to defend every detail. You don't have to prove your piece to people committed to misunderstanding it. Sometimes the wisest move is to step back and preserve your own balance.
And stepping back does not mean you don't care. It can mean you care enough not to feed the fire. It can mean you value your energy, your focus, and your emotional health. Boundaries are not walls. They are filters. They help you decide what deserves your attention and what does not.
Yes, boundaries are a form of clarity. Without them, every opinion enters the house. Every mood becomes contagious. Every comment becomes a crisis. With boundaries, you can choose what enters your mind and what stays outside. That choice is not selfish. It is necessary.
Let's bring in another English word that fits here. Response. A response is measured. It may include words, action, or silence, but it comes from choice rather than impulse. When you train yourself to respond instead of react, you're not only improving emotionally, you're also speaking more intentionally.
And intentional speech is beautiful because it carries respect. Respect for the other person, yes, but also respect for yourself. You are saying, I will not let the first wave speak for me. I will wait long enough to know whether this feeling deserves a voice or just a moment of attention.
I love that. Sometimes feelings deserve attention, not expression. That is a very mature distinction. Not every feeling must be posted, texted, argued, or announced. Some feelings just need a breath, a notebook, a walk, or a quiet moment until they become clearer.
Exactly. And that's why emotional regulation is not emotional denial. You're not acting like the feeling doesn't exist. You're creating the right conditions for it to settle, like stirring muddy water and then letting it rest. If you wait, the water becomes clearer. If you keep shaking it, it stays cloudy.
That image is perfect. It makes the process feel gentle instead of forced. Many people think self-control has to be harsh, but it doesn't. It can be soft. It can be patient. It can sound like, okay, I feel upset, and I'm going to take care of myself before I decide anything.
That sentence is worth practicing. Okay, I feel upset, and I'm going to take care of myself before I decide anything. It slows down the nervous system. It gives the mind a job. It says, no rushed conclusions today, thank you very much. We are going to be a little more careful than that.
That carefulness is not weakness. It's wisdom. People often admire loud certainty, but quiet wisdom is often more useful. Quiet wisdom notices nuance. It sees that life is not only black and white. It remembers that one moment rarely tells the whole story. That perspective makes people steadier.
And steadier people are easier to trust, including by themselves. When you know you won't abandon yourself at the first uncomfortable feeling, you become more stable inside. You trust your own ability to handle discomfort. That trust changes how you show up in work, relationships, and learning.
Let's give listeners another small practice. When you feel strong emotion, say the emotion out loud or in your mind, then wait one beat before doing anything else. Name it, pause, choose. That simple rhythm can become a habit. It sounds small, but small habits build strong inner habits.
And if that feels too fast, make it even smaller. One breath, 1 second, one sip of water. The point is not the size of the pause. The point is the interruption of automatic behavior. Once automatic behavior breaks, awareness can enter. Once awareness enters, better choices become possible.
I think many listeners can relate to the feeling of looking back and wishing they had paused. The message that should not have been sent. The sentence that came out too sharp. The assumption that felt true but wasn't. We all have those moments. The lesson is not shame. The lesson is learning.
Yes, learning without shame is the dream. Shame says, I am bad. Learning says, that was a hard moment, and I can do better next time. That difference changes everything. Shame freezes people. Learning moves them forward. Emotional growth depends on the second one.
And growth often begins with self-compassion. You can be honest about your mistakes without attacking yourself. You can say, I reacted too quickly, but that does not make me hopeless. It makes me human. It gives me a chance to practice again with more awareness next time.
That kind of self-talk is powerful. The way you speak to yourself can either create panic or create stability. If your inner voice is constantly rude, you will feel more defensive inside. If your inner voice is steady and kind, you are more likely to recover quickly when life gets messy.
So maybe emotional intelligence begins with a better inner conversation. Not fake positivity, not pretending everything is amazing, just a more truthful, calmer voice inside. A voice that says, I see what's happening, and I can handle this, one step at a time.
That's a great summary. One step at a time is often the real answer. It's not flashy, but it works. You don't need to solve your whole life in one emotional moment. You only need to manage the next breath, the next thought, the next response.
And when you do that repeatedly, you become someone who doesn't panic as easily. Not because life gets easier, but because you get steadier. That steadiness is worth practicing. It changes how you communicate, how you learn, how you love, and how you recover from disappointment.
Yeah, and I think that's why this topic matters so much. Emotions are not a side issue. They shape conversations, decisions, relationships, and confidence. Learning to handle them is part of learning how to live. It's not extra, it's central.
Let's revisit the idea of the house one more time. One room can be messy, but the house is still standing. One bad hour does not erase a good week. One conflict does not erase all connection. One mistake does not erase all progress. That perspective is calming because it restores proportion.
Proportion is such an underrated skill. When emotions get loud, everything feels equal in intensity. A small issue feels like a huge issue. Proportion brings the size back into view. It helps you say, this matters, but it is not the end of everything. That sentence can save your peace.
And peace is not passive. Peace is something you protect. You protect it with clarity, with boundaries, with pauses, and with honest language. You protect it by not believing every thought that passes through your mind. You protect it by refusing to make a crisis out of every uncomfortable moment.
That's the skill we keep circling back to, refusing unnecessary crises. Life will still have real problems. We are not pretending otherwise. But a lot of stress comes from interpretation, not events. When you handle interpretation better, the same event becomes much easier to carry.
For example, if someone is late, the event is simple. They are late. The interpretation might be, they don't respect me, they never care, they always do this. Emotional control asks you to slow down and separate what happened from the story your mind is trying to build around it.
And when you do that, you become less reactive and more curious. Curiosity is a powerful emotional tool. Instead of jumping to punishment or panic, you ask a question. What do I actually know? What else could be happening? What would I say if I were calmer?
That curiosity is such a gift. It turns the mind from a courtroom into an investigation, not a judgment, but an inquiry. And that shift can change relationships too, because when we approach others with curiosity, we give them room to explain before we decide what their behavior means.
Exactly. Many conflicts escalate because people skip curiosity and jump straight to conclusions. A calm question can stop a whole argument from growing. It says, "Help me understand," instead of, "I already decided you're guilty." That tiny difference can change the tone of an entire conversation.
I think this is also why listening matters so much. Real listening is emotional regulation in action. You are not just waiting for your turn to speak. You are making space for another reality to exist beside your own. That requires patience, and patience is one of the strongest emotional muscles.
That's beautifully put. And patience is not passive either. It's active restraint. It's saying, I could react right now, but I choose to understand first. In a world that rewards speed, patience can feel old-fashioned. But emotionally, it is often the most powerful thing you can do.
Maybe that's the message of today's episode. Your feelings are real, but they are not always final. Your first thought is a starting point, not a verdict. Your reaction is optional. Your response is where your character shows up. And character, over time, changes life.
I like that a lot. And I would add this. You are allowed to be a work in progress. You do not have to become a perfect person by next Monday. You just have to practice one better pause, one better question, one better response. Progress is built from repeated small choices.
So, if you've been hard on yourself lately, maybe today is a good day to soften that voice. Not to excuse harmful behavior, but to stop treating every emotional mistake like a moral failure. You are learning. You are adjusting. You are becoming more aware with time.
And awareness is everything. Once you notice the pattern, you can interrupt it. Once you interrupt it, you can change it. Once you change it a few times, you start to trust the new version of yourself. That trust is what makes future pauses easier.
Let's do a quick recap for listeners. First, emotions are natural. Second, your brain can be dramatic. Third, the pause between feeling and reacting is powerful. Fourth, small habits build stability. And fifth, you don't need to attend every emotional invitation life.
That is a very good recap. I would maybe add one more thing. You can practice this in tiny moments, not only big ones. The way you answer a text, the way you handle a mistake, the way you speak to yourself in the morning, all of that is practice for bigger moments later.
Yes, exactly. Emotional strength is built in ordinary moments, not only in crises. That's why even a normal day can be meaningful. Every pause is practice. Every response is rehearsal. Every choice to slow down is a vote for the kind of person you want to become.
And that's a hopeful place to end up. You don't need to fear your emotions. You can learn to work with them. They can be loud, but they don't have to be in charge. They can be present, but they don't have to define the whole story of your day.
Before we go, here's a challenge for you. Today, notice one emotional moment, even a small one. Don't rush past it. Pause, breathe, and see if the situation is really as dramatic as your mind first claimed. That little experiment can teach you a lot about yourself.
And if you do it, maybe even just once, you'll be training a skill that carries over into everything else. Conversations become calmer, decisions become clearer, and self-trust starts to grow. That is a quiet kind of power, but it is real, and it changes things.
So remember, emotions are not enemies. They are signals, visitors, weather, information. They matter, but they do not have to rule the whole room. You can notice them, breathe with them, and choose your next step with more care than before.
And that's the heart of it. Not perfection, not coldness, just a little more space between the feeling and the reaction, a little more kindness in the inner voice, and a little more confidence that you can handle what comes up. That's a strong place to build from.
Thank you for spending this time with us, learning English and learning a little more about yourself at the same time. That combination matters to us because language is not just grammar and vocabulary. It's also how we describe our inner world and how we make sense of it together.
Yeah. And if today's episode helped you slow down even once, then we've done something worthwhile. Keep practicing that pause. Keep noticing the story before you believe it. Keep choosing response over reaction whenever you can, even if you do it imperfectly at first.
This is Lily, and I hope you carry one calm moment with you today, even if the rest of the day feels busy. Let that moment be your reminder that you can pause, think, and choose. You are not at the mercy of every feeling that passes through.
And I'm Mike, reminding you that a small pause can be a very big skill. You don't need to win every emotional battle today. You just need to notice one moment, breathe through it, and answer with a little more care than the automatic version would.
And this is English Medium. Thanks for being here with us, for listening, and for giving yourself a chance to grow one thoughtful conversation at a time. We'll see you next time. And until then, be gentle with your mind, your words, and your reactions.
Bye for now, and remember, if your brain starts writing a drama, you do not have to accept the first draft. Pause, check the facts, choose your response, and keep going. That's how you stay steady, even when the inner narrator gets a little too enthusiastic.
One last thing before we leave. You do not need to fix your whole life today. Just choose one better response, one calmer sentence, or one extra breath. Tiny changes are still changes, and sometimes they are the ones that matter most.
Absolutely. Tiny changes add up quietly, and then one day you realize you're not reacting the way you used to. That is progress. That is growth. And that is worth noticing, celebrating, and carrying forward into tomorrow with a little more trust in yourself.